Hello and welcome to One Chunk at a Time. Um, I'm making my first game in GameMaker Studio. Technically not my first game, but probably, hopefully, my first completed game. I have used GameMaker Studio 2 before, and I find it quite an excellent program for new people getting into game design and game programming. Um, I'm going to be using the GameMaker language rather than the drag and drop method for a simple little game, which is going to you're going to understand it more as time progresses. But I'm only going to be doing short little videos, as the title suggests, one chunk at a time. Part of this, the reason for me streaming the videos like this, is so I can hopefully achieve more productivity than I would be otherwise. Um, you can probably tell from my voice right now, I'm very nervous. I think there's a little bit of a shake in my voice. I've got a little bit of a shake in my arms right now. It's quite scary putting your skills out there and showing others how you do what you do. So, yeah, please forgive me for any nerves that are showing through right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project in the GameMaker language. So if you don't know, with this program, you can do the drag and drop method of creating games or the GameMaker language. Drag and drop is a fantastic way of getting into making games. It's got a very simple interface. Means you don't have to deal so much with code, but you still have to do a little bit of logic in it. But I'll be using the GameMaker language. So I started once on the drag and drop method, and I moved eventually to the GameMaker language, so I had more fine control over what was happening. So I'm just going to call this project Game 1. I don't have a title for it yet. That'll happen eventually. But just for the time being, it's just going to be called Game 1. So I'm going to save that. And it's going to take a moment to give us the basic template for a game. And as you can see down here on the right hand side in the assets browser, we've got a whole bunch of little empty folders. There's nothing in them except for rooms. We've got the starter room, which is I guess the most basic. I don't know what you'd call it. It's an object where things would happen. It's been a long time since I've actually made anything, since I've actually used GameMaker Studio, so a bit of a theme that's going to be here is I'm going to make mistakes. Full stop. I'm just going to make mistakes. I'm going to learn from those mistakes, hopefully, but I am just going to make mistakes. You're probably going to see some as I go along that I'm not going to see. Feel free to comment them very gently, kindly, hopefully, and respectfully in the comments to this video. I might see them later, but generally I think I'm going to learn a lot from making those mistakes. I personally think it's the way that we do learn the most. It just takes some readiness to make those mistakes rather than expect perfection, which often goes through my head. So yeah, what I often do in the programming that I've done, so far my preferred language is actually Python. I've learned C++. I set that as a task for myself a number of years ago to kind of learn one of the hardest languages. That was apparently, from my understanding at the time, one of the most robust languages was C++, but also had a high learning curve. And I figured if I could learn that, I could learn any other language. And I think that's kind of been true. It took me some years and persistence, some making mistakes and learning from them, going through periods of lots of coding to periods of absolutely no coding at all for weeks or months because I got very disheartened. But eventually I did get a better grasp of C++ over time, and then I found the Python language, and I found it quite beautiful and simple to use. I like the expression of coding things in a Pythonic way, which generally means very clean, easy to read code that uses less punctuation and more white space. to explain where things are, so that when you're just reading through a page of code, the meaning should become quite clear, and you don't have to, that there's not a lot of clutter on the screen. I've since went from there onto GameMaker Studio, went to explore that, but recently I haven't released any games or anything, so I don't actually have any experience with that. I've probably got a lot of started and stopped projects that have happened over the years, probably over the last 12 years or so. And recently, just this year, I finished a project, just a Discord bot, just a chat bot, that happens for a group that I'm in, and it's actually been used quite a lot now. So that's, in a sense, the first thing I've really released publicly for someone else to be able to use is just a Discord bot. So that's a lot of just code. Not really. I'm personally not a very good visual designer or artist at all. So that's sort of one of the areas that I want to improve on and get more expertise with. And there is something that I want to do with this series here, is to actually get better at those skills in a way that you'll see. But yeah, it's been maybe a few months. I think it was at the start of the year that I was last using this. So I'm going to be kind of both. Basically, I've got a lot of rust on my skills and my knowledge, and I'm not entirely sure what updates have happened to GameMaker Studio. A lot of the programming I use a heavy reliance on logging, just logging what the program is doing as it's doing it, which I find helps me develop my code a lot better. And there's two things off the top of my head about that. So one thing with logging, doing a lot of logging, when I'm bug checking and trying to find out why something is going wrong, I find it really useful to be able to look back over any sections of the previously run code to see where certain variables are at. And if you're not sure, what I mean by logging is basically saying, getting the program at each step of the way for the program to say, typically to a text file. So as the program's running, it's just going to write to a text file and say, this is what's happening at the moment. This is where we're at. Usually I'll even just report variables and I'll say, this is what this variable is. And it'll just continuously do that to a text file. So that when it gets to a bug, and it will, it will always get to bugs. If you don't get bugs, if you don't have it crash while you're programming, it's a little bit more suspicious, as the joke goes. But I find that just really helpful, so that when it does crash, I can look back at the log and go, okay, there's where it crashed. It's basically the end of the file. Now I'll go back a few steps and see what went wrong, what was happening, what was the state of the program at that stage. I think more advanced users learn to use the debugging tools of their programs a lot better. That they don't need to do this. They'll put breakpoints and things like that, and basically have that data and that information that I tend to get from logging files output to the user as the program is running, and they're watching and monitoring it and making the program stop when necessary. I frankly haven't really mastered those skills yet. As I said, I've relied a lot on logging. So the other point about logging and why I do it is I also use it as a way to comment a lot of my code. So often, instead of commenting and saying this is what I'm doing here, and sort of, leaving those little notes that you do to explain to other programmers or yourself, to explain what that code is doing, so and anybody can look at it and understand it without having to sit there and really read every bit of the functions and such. Instead of actually leaving those lines that say, this is what I'm doing here, I'll actually just log that, and I'll say that I'll put in a line that says, okay, send this to the log, this is what I'm doing here. And so instead of leaving comments, I'm actually just leaving logged phrases and sentences that are explaining what's happening, what it's at, stage it's at, what variables are. And so that means those lines that I insert that are logging, serve those two purposes. One is basically outputting to the text file that I can check later if I need to, and then the other is providing some inline commenting to my code so that it makes sense. I have found in the past that if I don't do commenting, I can come back a few days later, usually a few weeks later, but a few days later, sometimes I'll come back to the code and I'll go, I don't understand what I was doing here, what my intent was, why I was doing this. I really should have commented that when that was fresh in my mind. So, and that's just a practice that I think a lot of teachers highly recommend and try to embed people to follow, is just comment your code. If it's not for other people, it's for yourself, because you will not always remember what your purpose and intent was when you're writing something. I was also going to say that I cannot remember. No, that's okay. So, as I said, I'm going to be doing this one chunk at a time. So the simplest thing that I tend to do is I do a lot of formatting of that logging. So when it prints out to a text file, I don't like it to, like what will happen is the first bit of the log is usually the time that this line happens. So you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You don't have to be logging the time and the date and everything for each line of code, everything that you output to the logs. But I find it interesting, especially if I look over a series of lines in a log and I can see how long it took to get from one section to another. If I can see that a whole second the program stopped between two lines, I can see there's an issue there. But if it's going from one line to the next in less than a second, that's sort of a good flow. But I tend to format it using a lot of white space and tabs, and this is going to make a little bit more sense later as I add more. But I'm going to go into the scripts here, and we're going to create a script. Script. All right, so that's interesting. I think that's a little automatic thing I can actually change. I can get rid of that and add in other stuff as I will do later. So the very first thing I'm going to make here in this video is a script that simply inserts. I'm going to give it a number. It's just going to return back to me a number of tabs equal to that number. Sounds weird, sounds pretty basic, but that's all it is. This script is going to just create a bunch of tabs in a string. Something else to explain, I probably should have said at the start, this is not a tutorial. This is not a how-to. This is not a lesson or a class on how to program or use GameMaker Studio or to make a game. This is none of that. This may help you, and you may be interested in being able to follow along to learn some of the basics or see how things are done. If anything, this is more of an accompaniment of you joining me while I make this, and being able to sort of be a wing man or wing girl as I make this game, and me talking about the stuff ups and the mistakes I make along the way, as well as you know, all the ins and outs and the highs and lows that I get, and the successes hopefully as I go along. So making this script, a script is basically it's a function in GameMaker Studio, GameMaker language. It's not so much a function, it's more that at any point in code when you call a script, it just basically says, okay, insert whatever's in that bit of text over there right here. So scripts in GameMaker language are sort of a easy way of just chunking bits of code so it's not a mess everywhere. I think in other languages like Python and C++, you might call it modules, or can't think of any other names. So in GameMaker language, the slashes, double slashes, is comments. At the start of a script, what we're doing is, I think we're putting in what little tooltips will appear when you start typing out the script. It's going to pop up with these first few lines saying, just to give you an indication of this is what you want to pass to it. So the name of this one is just going to be called s_t, and that's going to stand for string, as in what I want to get out of it, underscore tabs. So the next one is arg tabs, and what I do, so the default here, it has called the script1, so but I have called it s_t, and then we've got the scope here. So the function word obviously is just calling to say we're creating a function. We're just telling the program to create a function. The name of it's st, and between these two brackets is what it is the scope of what this function does. Everybody has their own personal preference about what's the right way or wrong way, better or worse for how you do your curly braces. For functions, you can either do it as it started out, the open one starts there and the closed one starts there. I seem to always prefer actually doing it on the same line, not on the same line, but in lines, so that when I see one brace, I can look basically in a vertical line straight down and see the other brace that closes it or opens it. That's just my preference. When I find when it's like that, you kind of have to read the line a bit more. It's just not as quick for the eyes. I think it takes a minuscule bit more programming for the brain. So this function, it has assumed it's received an argument, just whatever the first argument was is tabs, and that's going to be a number. So we're going to assume that this function, this script, has been handed a number, and we're going to return string repeat. And I'm going to explain what this is doing. Now, I think in GameMaker language they've made the semicolons redundant now. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm just going to be on the safe side and I'm going to put it in. I think there was a reason, some little catch cases where closing off your lines with a semicolon is just useful, or otherwise there are some small circumstances where if you don't do that, it just the compiler, GameMaker Studio 2, doesn't know exactly what you're doing. So in this function, what it's going to do is it's going to return, so I give it the number, tabs, and it's going to give back to me a string, and it's going to give back to me the result of this. And what this is calling another script that's called string repeat. So just like mine is called s_t, there is another script somewhere like that's basically built into GameMaker language that's called string repeat. So somewhere else is another little window like this that looks almost exactly like this, but it's called string repeat, and it has something within its own scope. And string repeat is handed a string. It's handed two pieces of information is what string repeat looks for. Just in the same way my script looks for tabs. It looks for one argument and that I call tabs. It looks for two. The first one is a string, and the second one is a number. So this first string, all the strings I think are encased in the double quotes, and also I think they can be encased in single quotes as well. Let's see. Nope, maybe not. Double quotes will do. And because I want to do tabs, so if I type tab in GameMaker Studio, it'll put a tab like that. But that's not exactly going to work, I don't think, if I were to actually just put in a tab between these quotes. It might do, I'm not really sure. It's not very explicit, does it? Like if I were to come back in a day or two and go, what is that little gap there? Why is it empty? It's not very clear. So between these two quotation marks, I'm going to do, I can't remember what the name of these are, but when you do a special character, if you do \t what that just basically is telling the compiler is it's not saying, oh, put in a _t. It's actually saying, oh, there's a backslash here. So what we're doing is some sort of special character, whatever the following letter is or number or whatever it is afterwards. It means I'm gonna turn that into something. And in this case, it's a tab. So this _t, the program knows we're talking about a tab. So we're giving this string repeat function the string, which is simply tab, and it's going to repeat that a number of times equal to argument 0, the number I've given it. And argument 0 is tabs. It's this one here. So when you give it a bunch of arguments, it'll put it in like a little list, and I'm saying give me the 0th one from that list of the arguments. And this is my frustration with the programming language, and I have had it all along. Of course, that lists and anything that is in some sort of serial array, one after the other, whenever you want to refer to the first one, you have to refer to the 0th one. It starts at 0 and then goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically what I'm saying here is the 0th argument that I was given, which would be the number I've given, goes into this function. String repeat will process that, it'll do its magic, and it's going to pop out a string at the end, and that's what my function is going to return. So let's go see if we can test that. What is the easiest way to do that? So GameMaker Studio uses objects. So I'm just going to go and create an object. So I'm just using the right click menu here, object. This is going to get a little bit more advanced here, going into objects and things like that. So, but I only want to test that function to make sure it's actually working. So when this object is created, so now this function, I don't think it's actually being called, this script has actually been saved as s_t. So I need to actually rename it over here in the scripts group. So if I click rename, and then we go s_t, now it knows when I try to call that script, it knows to look inside this code block, and it'll find the function and knows what to do. So when this object gets created, it's kind of funny because I don't really even have anything I think I'm going to output at this point. Let me think. Until I've actually got the logging up and going, I'm not going to be able to test this just yet. But at the moment, that's what I'm going to do. This is my chunk for this string. It's just doing this one simple function. I'm going to close that object. I'm even going to delete this object here. You probably should, like, if you're gonna create a script and create a function or such, test them as you go, rather than do them in a whole bunch. This is one of those things that do as I say, not as I do. But then again, we're all gonna make mistakes and learn from it. I know in the past I have. I speak from experience of just doing far too much in one go before I actually do testing. But in this case, this is a very, very, very simple little script here. So that's pretty much it for this video. Join me for the next video to see the next chunk of this game. Thank you very much for watching. If you got any questions or comments, put them in the under this video. I don't think there'll be too much to be said. But yeah, I hope you join me for the rest of this game. Cheers.